Most fund managers chase deals. The ones who get oversubscribed build systems. My guest closed a $300 million fund, not by finding better companies, but by having a repeatable process that transforms underperforming manufacturers into high EBITDA exits. So if you're deploying capital into lower middle market businesses and you don't have a documented value creation playbook, you're leaving returns on the table and your LPs know it. Stay locked in because what Eric breaks down here will change how you underwrite, how you operate, and how you raise your next fund. All this and more coming right now. Here we go. Before we dive in, just a word from our sponsor. When doing deals, we all know that raising capital is the one thing that unlocks everything. That's why I've partnered with Reef Pass Investors that are actively funding deals right now. So if you're a deal syndicator or a founder thinking about launching an M&A-focused buy and build platform, reach out to Reef Pass Investors at reefpassinvestors.com. They are one of the best investors in the game that are helping you launch a new long-term holding company. So here's what I want you to do. Click the description in the notes and contact them for a discovery call and potentially get an invite to pitch your next M&A deal. Now, let's get back to the show. Eric, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Really excited to talk about how to buy complexity, fix these companies systematically, and turn it into returns that get you LPs that have you oversubscribed. So thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you. I'm excited to talk to. And before we jump in, just a quick disclaimer. All expressions of opinion provided in this podcast are subject to change without notice and are not intended to be a forecast of future events or results. There is no assurance that the trends highlighted in this podcast will occur in the future or that projections, if any, will be met. So I just want to make sure that we get that out of the way. And then let's dive in, my man. So you've done some amazing things. You've closed over 38 deals across metals, specialty chemicals, and industrial manufacturing. You just hit a $300 million hard cap on Fund 2, which my understanding is, keep me honest on all this, is that you're also oversubscribed. So walk me through the sequence. What are the first three operational levers that you pull in the first 90 days, and how do you decide which one goes first?
Yeah, so we take a approach to this. We like to call it a fix and build strategy. Phase 1 is fix and phase 2 is build. It's a system we use called the PortCo Value Creation System. It depends a little bit company to company what's going on there. But if you said, hey, Eric, Pareto it out and tell me kind of like what tends to happen, what creates 80% of the value creation in that phase 1 approach, it's really three things. And it's incentivizing and aligning the management team. It's rationalizing the revenue portfolio, and it's optimizing the operational footprint. Those things happen a lot. Because of the nature of the businesses we buy, which tend to be businesses that want to be sold. They may be in a misaligned ownership structure, which oftentimes mean that they're underloved and undermanaged and therefore underperforming. So we need to do that phase 1 approach first, which is the fixed part. They usually have those things going on where the management team needs to be aligned and incentivized to go work on the revenue portfolio and optimize the manufacturing and supply chain footprint. And if it's a business that doesn't need the fixed phase, then we go directly to the build phase, improve it that way, which is all about doing bolt-on acquisitions or executing organic growth activities like new market entries, new geographic entries, new channel entries, things like that. But that systematic approach is what's really, really valuable. And it tends to be, those things where we see things that are really valuable, the kinds of companies that we like to buy, which are $50 million revenue, $50 million to $500 million revenue businesses in the manufacturing and value-added distribution space.
Brilliant. So how does that framework help to tee you up for doing private equity turnarounds? How would that work if you were teaching somebody else, maybe apply that model to say, look, this is why this is important? What would you say?
Yeah, it's important because it's a very systematic process-driven approach based on the opportunity to create returns in a very systematic way that allows the strategy to work. And it's an anchoring activity, right? To make sure that we kind of always are asking ourselves, hey, are we executing the strategy right? And, are we using the right processes and systems to do it? That's really, really critical. And in private equity, any fund world, there's a lot of discussion around, generating alpha. Meaning, comes from, we were talking earlier in the show, right, about algebra, right, and calculus a little bit, well, alpha is like, okay, where does the curve cross the y-axis, right? But it's like, why do you start better, or end better than somebody else who's doing something similar? Why while you execute your strategy, why is the execution of that strategy better than somebody else's execution of the same strategy? That's kind of alpha. I'm grossly oversimplifying it, but having that systematic approach to doing it and having the playbook for doing it is really important, because at the end of the day, process is how work gets done. So if you define how that work gets done and what you expect the outcomes of that work to be, the results, then it's a lot easier to do it over and over and just get better and better and better at it.
Brilliant. Okay. So when you look at a distressed deal pre-LOI, what are 2 or 3 signals that tell you that it's unfixable, and what data surfaces all of that information the fastest?
Yeah, good question. So I'd say there are 2 really big things that, we think about a lot, which are number 1 is around the management team. And then number 2 is around the go-to-market strategy. So relative to the management team, if we're in a management presentation and we're thinking to ourselves, wow, like for this business to, do well, or what we would expect it to do, we would need to change the whole management team. That's a bad sign. That's kind of a walk away fast sign, right? Or if you look at it, the flip side of that coin would be, if you look at it and go, wow, this business is not doing as well as we would like, or not where we would expect it to be. But, even if you fix the whole management team, there wouldn't be, an opportunity for it to do well. That'd be, another kind of same thing there, right? But it's about the situation with the management team, right? And then the other thing is the go-to-market strategy, right? Every business has to have a reason to exist to be in business long-term. Customers have to want you in the industry. And if customers don't want you in the industry, then you don't really have a reason to exist. So we think about that a lot, right? It's like, can you do the right things with the right human capital structure? And, what do customers kind of think of the business, and where does it sit in that competitive landscape such that there's a reason for it to exist and continue on?
Okay, got it. Now, I've been wanting to ask you, so beyond the Opta specifics, what is the underlying decision logic you use there that an emerging manager could apply to their next distressed deal right now? Yeah,
part of it we hit on a little bit, which, it's having that systematic approach that's your guiding light, of course, the ability to execute your strategy or value creation plan. It gives you that thing to anchor you in every deal. And those processes and systems are really, really critical. So we talk a lot about engineering the process stack in, 2 kinds of processes. One kind of process are value creation processes. Those are things that customers pay you for. So it tends to be 3 things in manufacturing, right? It's designing products, manufacturing products, and selling products in a value-oriented way. So value-based selling. And then there's key support processes. So those are the processes you need to do to support the key value creation processes. But understanding those things, understanding how work gets done in that given business and why customers pay you for that work to get done is really, really critical. And then if you think about, our PortCo Value Creation System, really what that system is, it's just a collection of processes fueled by frameworks and tools to do things in a very standardized way so that it's scalable, repeatable, and generates the results that we're looking for.
That's brilliant. Now, you've mentioned process a few times. Would you say that that's a big part of why you guys are so successful and how you keep getting oversubscribed on your latest funds? Is that you mentioned you're essentially acquiring a bunch of processes, which I agree. And would you say that, you don't have to tell me what your processes are, but would you say that that has a lot to do with the secret sauce in your fund, is that you just have really dialed in processes that you can overlay on some of the companies that you acquire?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the system. I mean, if you look at what's going on in private equity right now, it's kind of interesting, right? It's a very bimodal distribution of funds that are getting funded, right? And what you're tending to see, and it's bimodal based on size. So you have the mega funds that are 10 billion or more assets under management, AUM. Then you have the 1 billion and less guys, is where we fall, that are, less than $1 billion AUM. What they tend to be, the small guys like us, they tend to be hyper focused on a very specific strategy with a very specific methodology for executing it, which completely describes us. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Why things have become bimodal and the guys in the middle are, maybe raising money as well. And it's because at the end of the day, investors want, the best returns that they can get. I mean, that's obviously like motherhood and apple pie sort of statement, but it's like, okay, how do you get really good returns? Well, the answer is you pick people that are experts in what they're doing. They invest in what they know. And, for us, again, buying these $50 million to $500 million revenue manufacturing businesses, we know the systems and processes that work really, really well in those businesses and create value. And I think it's important, if I were an LP, which I am, I'm an LP in my own fund and then, sometimes invest in other funds as well. But it makes sense to me. That's what you're looking for, is like somebody who invests in a unique strategy and knows how to execute it well and can do it over and over and over and over again in a very consistent way. So that's why process matters, because with scalable and repeatable processes, you tend to get very consistent results with a very, low standard deviation. So you end up having a very, skinny standard normal curve, which that's what we're all looking for in investing at the end of the day.
Of course. Absolutely. Now, I know that, we're talking about processes and we could talk about finance and all these things. There's also people involved in these things. And the 25-cent word is human capital. And so we have to assess, and you mentioned earlier that, if you look at the executive leadership team or the ELT and you're like, look, we got to replace all these people. They don't know what they're doing or whatever reason. There is an element of closing deals and running a fund that has to do with the people that you are acquiring, or the deals, the people within the deals. So talk about what are the 2 or 3 behavioral signals in a room that tell you the existing CEO can, in fact, execute on that transformation versus the one that you need to replace before you close? What would you say?
Yeah, so it's a real simple test. And I have to admit, it's something my dad taught me a long, long time ago. He was a university professor for a long time. He taught math and physics, and he pointed something out to me. I remember one night I was, struggling with math concept, and he was a guy, I guess you could do this back, many decades ago, but he would teach geometry by taking his class to the pool hall and, using simple methodologies and real world examples to, teach that sort of, stuff. Right. But what he said to me, I remember this concept I was struggling with, and he explained it to me. I'm like, oh my God, that makes perfect sense now. And I'm like, I don't understand, why I didn't understand it before. And the thing that he said was well, Eric, you can tell how smart people are by how well they can take really complex concepts and break them down in a way that, they can explain them to you in the most simplest of terms, like you're in 5th grade. And that always stuck with me. And it's kind of a bit of a great test for thinking about a CEO when you're asking CEO questions about the business, right? Because any business is going to be pretty complex. And usually the things we're talking about are pretty complex in that business. So the question I always have or the thing that's always going through my mind when I'm evaluating CEOs and executive leadership is when you give them a difficult question, how quickly can they explain the concept in very simple terms? Because if they can, it means they know the material really well and they know the business really well. And that's important because if you think about a CEO who, is running a business with 100 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people, they need to communicate at every level of the organization. And breaking it down to the simplest terms is really critical because A, that means they've thought through it and actually understand what they're trying to execute. And then B, they can communicate it to other people in the organization such that, the acronym for team actually works, which is together everybody achieves more. But if people don't understand the basic strategy of the company and their part in it, it's going to be really hard for that business to execute it. And it starts with the CEO being able to explain it in very, very simple terms that pretty much anybody could understand.
Yeah, I've heard it said ELI 5, explain it like I'm 5. And you remind me of a really cool principle. I didn't come up with this thing, but it's no less profound. It's from, I believe it was Steve Jobs, who said simplicity is the highest form of sophistication. And we know if you kind of study that guy and his leadership, that was something he believed in deeply, is to say, simplify, simplify, simplify. He even had a piece of art, and if you know it, it'll actually talk about that in the art piece of just simplifying the artwork. It went from a complex to a very simple pencil drawing. And the whole principle in his leadership is like exactly what you said is we need to see simplicity. We don't have to overcomplicate things to try to get people to think we're smart. In fact, someone who's actually smart sees someone complicate things and it has the opposite effect. Would you agree?
Yeah. Well, they're usually trying to hide something when they're, it's just complication is just a form of obfuscation. Right. And so when I see that, it's like a big red flag, right? It's like, oh, okay. Either that or you're a philosophy major and you need to use polysyllabic words to express really simple concepts so that you feel good about yourself or something. But, in the real world, when we're trying to get things done, the simpler explanation and methodology is usually the better one because frankly, it like goes into people's brains faster and then execution happens faster. It's like there's no benefit of complicating anything ever in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole part of private equity, which is kind of the PortCo valuation or the PortCo Value Creation System. So talk about one specific tool that a fund manager could adapt today and put to work on their next deal this quarter. What would you say?
Yeah, a good one that we use, and it kind of starts here with us, so I'm going to highlight it, which is what I would call the strategy deployment process, or we call it the Speyside management system, but frankly, it's the conglomeration and confluence of several things that we've all seen at various companies at which we've worked, and it's out there. It's you hear this a lot, but we kind of do it in a specific way, and it's a 5-step approach. Step one is what do you want to get achieved, and for us that means like in the hold period, which we usually kind of think about either in 3-year chunks or 5-year chunks. So in the 3 to 5 year period, what is the value creation plan? Like what do we want to get done such that that defines great. And generally speaking, for us and what we're trying to do with Speyside, with the kind of companies we're trying to buy, it usually means we're trying to double EBITDA in the first 3 years, and usually by significantly improving the EBITDA margins. Right, that's kind of the phase one for us, and then phase two would be in the next 1 to 2 years. Like how do we then grow? Right, but step one is what defines great in that 3 to 5 year period, and then step two is like how far do we want to go in this year, right? In a 1 year period, right? So then we'll develop, a 1 year profit plan for the year, break it down into digestible parts, create midterm goals. We usually like to do it. Some firms would do it quarterly. We tend to do it monthly for the year, and we'll create a balanced scorecard to explain like what that means. And then, part of that is like step three, which is like, okay, how are you going to do it? And it's that balanced scorecard. It's the 1 year improvement plan. It's what are the key projects and initiatives we're going to execute this year, usually 3 to 7. And then, what are the key processes we're going to try to improve during the year? We're always looking to do process improvement and continuous improvement because there's always something that can get a little bit better at a company. And then, the next question, step 4, is how, kind of like how much. And that really is where those key metrics and 1 year goals and objectives come in, and SMART goals and things like that. We're real big on goals that are time bound, of course. A goal, without a time is, just a dream, right? Or said differently, a dream is just a goal without a deadline. So we're really big on deadlines, and, sometimes got to adjust them, right? Either forward or backward. And then, step 5 is probably the most important thing, is like, who's going to do it? So, what are the human capital resources that are needed? What skills do those folks need to have? What are the project plans look like that are built? Whose name is next to the task? And then monitoring and making sure it happens, and then iterating. Every 3 years, 1 year, and then quarterly and monthly, depending on the length of the process or the length of the initiative, to make sure that the whole period vision is being achieved. But just doing that and getting everybody on the same page and aligning and cascading goals throughout the organization is really, really, really valuable. And it kind of ties back to that that question you asked me before, like what's a big red flag with a CEO, right? And The answer is to be able to, communicate very simply and therefore effectively. Well, think about it. Think about the process I just described that I'm telling you is super duper important. If you got a person like leading that, and that person can't explain things very simply in a way that everybody can understand it, that process I just described is going to fall flat on its face and fail miserably.
Couldn't agree more. And, continuing pulling on that thread about sitting down with a CEO, when you sit down with a CEO, let's say he's been burned by financial buyers before, right? So there's a chip on the shoulder or some scar tissue. And, when you deal with some of them, what do you say and do in that first meeting just to make them trust that you're different? You're not someone who's going to burn them. You're looking to do a great deal, one that makes sense on both sides. What do you do to get them to trust that you're not one of those guys who are trying to burn him?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's hard to do in a minute, but in that first meeting, it's definitely doable. And the thing we really like to stress for folks is that for us, we're a bit of a unique fund from the perspective that we're really a fund built for operators by operators. So if you look at myself and my other two partners, we've all been C-level guys at middle market manufacturing businesses. And being able to explain that to a CEO of a business that we're trying to buy is really, really valuable. And we can do, at Speyside, we can do all the cool financial engineering stuff and structuring and whatnot. We've been doing it for decades, but I think, lots of firms can do that really well, frankly. That's kind of what you learn as an investment banker. So that's not unique to Speyside whatsoever, in my opinion. What's a little bit unique to us is our PortCo Value Creation System and the fact that it's fueled by people that have been sitting in that CEO seat before. And what you would notice, when we're talking to a management team about their business, a lot of times they're taking as many notes as we are. And the reason why is because we take a very consultative-based approach to it, where we like to have a discussion about the business and a holistic discussion about the business. So we like to talk about the market and the go-to-market strategy and the operational plan and the human capital plan, and then understand how that feeds into the financial plan and results. Where a lot of other PE firms, they're going to really start with the financial statements and they're going to crawl through the footnotes and ask those kinds of questions, which we're going to do that at some point during due diligence as well. But we're going to spend that first meeting getting to know that CEO, getting to know the business, and really understand the business strategy and how it gets executed. And then through that conversation, usually what those guys will see, they're like, based on the kind of questions we're asking, they're like, oh, you've sat in my chair. You understand how difficult it is, right? You're different than other PE firms where a lot of people there, the only thing they've ever run is a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint deck, where you guys have actually run businesses and plants and supply chains and sales forces and marketing plans and whatever. So that ability to, have that discussion on common ground, because we're a fund of operators built for operators, really helps connect with management teams and then get a deal done in a way that's beneficial to all.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, one question that I've been wanting to ask you, I know you managed over 70 union workers in Mexico. I'm curious of what the shop floor taught you. So what is one management principle you learned by supervising those 70 people that directly changes how you assess and even fix a portfolio company now that you're a fund manager?
Yeah, so it was actually 70 UAW guys in Waterloo, Iowa, and over 300 union guys in Mexico. So one, I was a shop floor supervisor, and then the other one, I was a plant manager. But pretty simple. Great rule of thumb is treat people how they want to be treated, or how you'd want to be treated yourself. Treat people with respect and care, and try to get to know them as people. But I guess that's my biggest, thing is I really love to understand why people do the things they do or think the way they think or, whatever. So I try to spend a lot of time, with that. And, because I think it's interesting. I guess what the decision I've come to about people is that, people are not generally illogical or irrational. If you had the same experiences in life and the same set of facts that person had, it's probably pretty likely you would make a similar or the same decision. So, while you may have different facts and experiences, and therefore it leads you to a different decision. Endeavoring to understand their background and what makes them tick and how they think, you can pretty quickly discern like why they make the decisions they make and how they get to the conclusions that they get to, right? And I think, you should be spending a lot of time, especially in leadership, you should be spending a lot of time listening. And here's why. It's so worthwhile. It's such a great return on investment, because as a leader of a business, you should be the chief constraint removal officer more than anything. And if you just listen to people, you'll understand the constraints in the business, back to process, right? What are the constraints to work getting done, i.e. the process not being efficient? And so if you respect people and you listen, you will just get gems of opportunity for improvement that create a high return on investment. And the fact that you're, listening and respecting folks, and then, giving them the resources they need to remove the constraint to do great work. It's my experience that like 95% of people, if not 99, want to do great things. Like they want to work as a team and have great results. And it's just a matter of like, how do you help them do that? And the answer is listen to them, find out what the constraint is and remove it. And my gosh, they will, do great things to try to create the result if you make it easy for them to do their job because you listened.
Hey, if you're finding value out of this discussion, could you do me a huge favor? Could you just take a second and hit that like or subscribe button? It costs you nothing, but it tells the algorithm that this is valuable information, and it helps us to get it to more people. Thank you. You're incredible. Now let's get back to the show.
Brilliant. When we first met, you told me a funny expression. I think it applies here. It's like the 7 Ps or something like that, where you have the 7 Ps and the 5 Cs. So maybe the 5 Cs and the 7 Ps, because this ties into removing constraints and leading people. But it's a very fun and funny expression that's hard to forget, as I well know after you told me that. It's all I could think about. So what are some of those I guess the alliteration that you have?
Yeah. So a buddy of mine that I played rugby with back in grad school, he was a Navy SEAL, and he was fond of talking about the 7 Ps, which I guess it's a thing in the teams, in the Navy SEAL teams, which is prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance. And that always stuck with me because, we'd be playing these rugby tournaments and, sometimes we'd win and sometimes we wouldn't. And, he'd always refer back to the 7 Ps, right? And he'd always be like, did we prepare? And, sometimes the answer was no, because, we had tests to take or interviews to do. And so the outcome wasn't great. And then another favorite of mine is clear. I guess I made this one up. Clear, consistent communication creates results. And it goes back to you think that people know what you said or whatnot, but saying it once is usually not enough. So saying it, multiple times, very clearly, very consistently, very constantly, it allows people to understand what's expected, especially in larger teams, right? You got to try to get everybody on the same page. I remember in graduate school, Covey came to visit our school, and he made 300 of us close our eyes in a big lecture hall and said, okay, close your eyes now, point which way is north. And then he's like, keep pointing. Now everybody open your eyes and look. And there were people pointing all over the place, right? And his point of that was, now think about that for a second. You all, at least think you're really smart. And you probably are pretty decently smart. And think about large organizations. There's 300 of you in here. Think about the very, very simple question I ask, which way is north? Now think about an organization with 1,000 people in it, and they're asked, hey, what's the corporate strategy? Right? It's kind of crazy, right? To think about you're going to probably, if you ask 1,000 people, you're probably going to get 3,000 answers. Because, half of them will change halfway through. But the point is clear, consistent, constant communication creates results, because again, getting people even on a 1-page, strategy, getting everybody on the same page is not easy. And it's a function of saying it over and over and over and over again so that people know what the plan is.
And so, yeah, of course, that constant communication, and really that is a leader's job, is to get the company, their team, whoever it is that are in part of their stewardship, to all pull in the same direction. And sometimes that's people. sometimes that's entire factories or divisions that are working or they're not. And so since you deal a lot with manufacturing and plants in your private equity fund, I'm curious about when you have to close one down, because this is a reality in private equity. Sometimes you have a portfolio, you got to either roll it out of your portfolio, or shut the whole thing down and kind of take the L. Either way, I'm curious, what are the financial and operational thresholds that trigger a plant closure? And how do you sequence the workforce communication that you were talking about? And how do you keep it from just destroying morale across the rest of the portfolio? What do you do? That's a tough spot.
Yeah, so there's kind of two parts of that. One part is making the decision, like how do kind of what are some basic guides to do that, and then the second part is like how do you execute, or what are some of the keys to executing? And just so like I'm about to summarize like a couple thousand pages. So when I was at Eaton, I wrote or co-authored what was called the standard transition process. And that was all about, shutting down and turning around and moving and starting up plants all around the world. I think at the time that company had like 200 plants. So they were constantly, moving things around the world. And in our world, in private equity world, to your point, especially the kinds of businesses we buy and, are looking at, a lot of times they're not completely operationally efficient. And one of the things we'll look at is, we'll start by understanding capacity utilization and profitability. And usually those two are, they kind of go hand in hand. They're a little bit yin and yang. But if you think about a lot of times, you'll see a plant where it's a 5-day a week operation, 8 hours in a shift. And so let's just say it has one shift, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. That's 40 hours. There's 168 hours in a week. That's about 24% of the hours in a week. So in that plant, you would say, at least on a time basis now, and, operational purists will kind of argue with me here a little bit about, what do you really look at in OEE and all these other things? Like there's, other metrics, but like a really simple one is just capacity utilization based on time, right? So if you're running 40 hours a week, one shift a week, just during the week, out of the 168 hours in the week, you're running at best at 24% capacity utilization on time. Well, that's not, you're going to have a hard time making money there, right? Because at least in manufacturing, there tends to be a lot of deployment of fixed capital into property, plant, equipment. And so your return on capital employed there, which, would oftentimes include working capital as well, is just not going to be really high because your capacity utilization is low. So that'd be the first thing you kind of look at, right? Is like, how many hours a week is a plant being run? And would there be an opportunity to make two plants into one? And also, like, there's kind of the other side of the coin, a little bit that gets ferreted out when you think about profitability. Sometimes you'll look at a plant and maybe it's the, capacity utilization is pretty low, but they're really, really profitable. And you go, wow, like, holy cow, they're super profitable, with pretty low capacity utilization and therefore low operating leverage. Maybe we should run more product at this plant, or maybe we should look for a way to grow because this plant will kill it. They'll make more gross profit and manufacturing profit and operating profit and EBITDA and free cash flow. So that's the other thing to think about is profitability. And it's a bit of a governor as well. You can accept lower capacity utilization if the profitability is higher. But then you kind of look for ways to continue to fill a great plant like that. So, we think about both things, like, is it too low, or is it underutilized from, a time or resource perspective, or is it underutilized from a profitability per square foot perspective? And it means we should look to put more work into that plant. So those are the two big things, like capacity utilization and then, profitability.
All right. So utilization, profitability. So you have distinct benchmarks. So maybe there are fund managers out there that don't do factory. Totally fine, right? We're all in the same path, just different off and on ramps. But I think what I really want to highlight, and I don't want to skip past this, is that you have thresholds. So you're not like, yeah, but he's a real nice guy, or, all that stuff. And I've been there, I've made that mistake. And what you have is to say, there's certain thresholds. We have that in place. It's already pre-decided. And if it enters into the red zone, we'll call it, we already know what to do. So we've already defined that sale point, that let's wind it down, let's roll it out. Would you say that, again, back to the process, would you say that is a big part of what you do, is to say, we know what the thresholds are to capture something before it goes really bad, we already have that in place and we know what to do. Would you say that that is a big part of what you do to cover your downside risk?
Yeah, I would say that understanding the industry at a detailed level is critical, right? And that's, sometimes people will ask us, like, sometimes you guys buy businesses that are underperforming. Like, aren't you a little bit, worried about that? Is that, is that like really risky? And what I say is that, situations like that where you have knowledge are less risky or de-risked. It's kind of like, you watch the guy that's like the lion tamer, right? Or I don't know if you've ever been to Florida and you watch these guys that like play around with alligators or whatever, or the guys that like dive with sharks. It's like they know they know those animals like so well that they can see the signs and read the signs so that they make sure that they're not putting themselves in danger, and they know how to deal with those situations so that they can get themselves out of danger. For us, it's kind of similar in the fact that, again, we've run plants and we've run sales forces and marketing teams and finance groups and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We, those are the lions and the sharks and the alligators you're kind of playing with, to your point, to make sure you understand when danger is around. But if you know what you're looking at and you know how to mitigate it, it's not that dangerous. And that's what we're really good at. And that's also why it's very important that, we're a firm of operators built for operators. And also we tend to hire really good management teams, operating partners, and consultants to help with understanding that risk. And more importantly, take the actions to quickly mitigate it. So that is, a really, really critical thing in what we do. It tends to be why, we can buy the kinds of companies that we buy and make them better.
Got it. A big part of, and you please keep me honest, but a big part of private equity and acquisitions, sometimes you buy the whole company, sometimes you just buy an asset through, so let's say, an asset carve-out. So in a carve-out LOI, walk me through, say, 3 items that you would negotiate or you recommend that someone would negotiate the hardest on, just from your opinion.
To me, it's probably number 1 is the transition services agreement. Number 2 would be what's true standalone adjusted EBITDA. And we can talk a little bit more about that. And then the third thing is in the deal docs, you're doing a lot of things to mitigate risk around those things. So making sure the reps and warranties and indemnifications all are congruent with what's going on in that company and or that carve-out process. So those probably be the 3 big things. And then there are kind of other, like sort of, I don't know, unique things that, would occur, like understanding like the human capital profile and what people do sometimes around playing games with certain assets. So if you think about like human capital and working capital and fixed capital, if somebody knows they want to carve out an asset, sometimes they'll plow a bunch of bad things into an asset, and then it becomes kind of a scapegoat that gets sent out into the desert to get slaughtered, but they lose all the risk associated with those, human capital, working capital, fixed capital, assumed liabilities, and all that stuff. So making sure you understand what those are, and not getting saddled with those, making sure you're not getting a scapegoat asset is really, really critical. But the transition services agreement that I talked about is really critical because that defines, how you're going to work together with the selling entity over, somewhere between 6 and 24 months to, continue to use their systems and services until you can get off of them and truly stand up that company as a unique standalone carved out entity. And, there's a lot that goes into those transition services agreement. The good news there is that, frankly, as the acquirer, you want to be off those systems as soon as possible. And they want you off of those systems as soon as possible. It's like the good news there, at least your interests are like really, really well aligned. But, sometimes like, you'll have folks that will do a carve out. And if you don't understand how those systems work and how to get off them quickly. Sometimes those folks will be on there much longer than the seller wants them to be. But, we look at it as like, we want to be good deal partners as well. So you got to negotiate those right. And then, endeavor to be a good deal partner and be done using your deal partners' systems and services as quickly as possible. And then what adjusted EBITDA is really, really critical because it does matter at the end of the day. I mean, EBITDA is, a large component of cash flow, right? It's a nice shorthand. You can't really fake cash flow, but, I guess you can fake EBITDA. So understanding standalone costs are critical, and some of them are one-time costs, and then some of them are ongoing costs to the standalone. So, one-time costs would be things like legal consulting, tax consulting, insurance consulting, management consulting, any of that kind of stuff, interim employees. Whereas like ongoing costs of standalone would be like your yearly audit, your yearly tax work, insurance for a smaller entity, standalone ERP systems, laptops and phones, and any management compensation that needs to be adjusted, or office lease assumptions, or increased supply costs because you don't have as much buying power, things like that. But putting that all into adjusted EBITDA, if you're paying a multiple off that, is really, really critical. And then making sure that flows through to free cash flow at the end of the day as well, so that at the end of the day, you can't really spend EBITDA. You can only spend cash. So you gotta make sure it shows up in cash flow at some point.
Yeah, I love that. And the TSA, the Transaction Services Agreement, this is a really cool thing for those that are new and may not understand it. If you're doing an asset carve out, that's typically not a standalone business. And you said earlier that they want you off the systems. And so we have to say, okay, what does that look like? It doesn't have standalone systems, processes, legal, audit, treasury, insurance, AP, AR. There's all kinds of things that just don't exist. And then I think what you're saying then is that the Transition Services Agreement really discusses how is that going to look. And in yours, does that imply any adjustments to the second point, EBITDA? Does that apply to any of that, or how do all of those connect, especially the first two? So the adjusted EBITDA, what that is, as well as the TSA. Does the TSA feed the adjustments, or how do you go about that? Yeah,
it can, because a lot of time, you're using those systems and services of the seller, and theoretically, right, the longer you're on their systems and services, the less time you're paying for your own. So it does affect the adjusted EBITDA, or it can positively, I guess. But you need to know, once you're off of those systems and services of the seller, you're going to then pay for them. And again, it's like, what is that's usually a negative adjustment to standalone adjusted EBITDA. And that's really, that's the hard part, in my opinion, about doing a carve out. I don't know. I love doing carve-outs. I think they're super interesting because there's so many moving parts, and so they're a little bit challenging, but which makes them super fun, right? It's like the difference between playing 3-dimensional chess, and checkers, or bridge and war. So they're great to do, but yeah, it's kind of the brackish water in a deal a little bit, is where transition service agreements meet adjusted EBITDA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could see where that linkage happens, man. So, earlier you mentioned that aligning, actually, I think in the very beginning of our conversation, you mentioned, aligning and incentivizing leadership a lot in obviously your own, but in PortCos that you're acquiring. So what does your equity incentive structure actually look like vesting milestones, performance triggers, rollover requirements, any of that? And how do you calibrate that upside so the CEO feels like a co-owner, they take on that responsibility, and they really act like and drive value that you're expecting? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, in a phrase that I'm going to plagiarize from my partner, Kevin, I love it. This phrase he reminds me of all the time, which is a great one, which is, we want partners, not employees. And, what he means by that, we really like to find alignment, with folks in such a way that we all are rowing the boat in the same direction at the same pace. And what that means for all parties involved, right? Whether it's our limited partners that invest in our fund, or us as the general partner in our fund or the operating partner in our portcos or the leadership teams in our portfolio companies is we all want businesses that are going to significantly increase the equity value quickly. And the way that we like to align that is by, working with folks such that they're highly incented to do the, long and difficult and challenging work that creates equity value in a business. If we can do that, like if we can deliver a business that, doubles or triples the EBITDA in our, 3 to 7 year hold period, it means the equity value is going to go way up. That means that our LPs are going to get a great return. It means we as the GP are going to get, good carry economics. And it means our operating partners and management teams hopefully create generational wealth. So partners, not employees. And the way we align that usually is with equity LTIPs. LTIP stands for long-term incentive plans, things that get paid out when we have a liquidity event, usually, the 3 to 7 year hold period. But we will put those in place for key value creation members and partners in the firm, and that allows us to make sure that those folks like really have something exciting to look forward to in terms of the opportunity to create generational wealth. And we've done that through a lot of different mechanisms. We've done it through options, restricted share units, phantom equity. But the one we like the most these days are profits interest units. So those are great because the folks that get them, they tend to be very tax efficient from the perspective of, at least in the United States, if you get PIUs, profits interest units, and you do an 83B election, you pay long-term capital gains tax on those payouts, which that's good. And it's fair. They earn it. So, government's getting plenty of money in those situations. But those folks are rewarded for their really hard, long, difficult work of, helping to create significant equity value based on executing the value creation plans that we author during operational due diligence. So that's really important to us. And, we tend to set aside somewhere between 7 to 10% of the diluted equity in a portfolio company, in a platform, for these long-term incentive plans that help align everybody's interests really, really, really well.
Yeah, I do the same, 10%. Now, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of learning, and sometimes this is fun. Sometimes it's complex. Sometimes it's very simple. And one of the things but all of it teaches us. And I'm curious for you. So there are deals that can teach you a lesson. Sometimes it was the best deal of your life and that taught you a lesson. Sometimes it might be the worst deal you've ever done. Also teaches you a lesson, right? We either win or we learn. So talk about a deal that taught you the most. What happened on that deal? What decision would you reverse if it was a bad deal? And how did that help you in your newly minted $300 million fund?
Yeah. So, the way I think about this, and you kind of hit on it quickly there, but I like to, on Sundays, I coach rugby. And I always tell my kids, there's no losing, there's just winning and learning. And a lot of times, we learn the most during adversity. And I think that's really important to know, and, sometimes you're going to have failures. Like, again, you're going to have learnings. We'll call them that. But, what can you take from them? And, we had a deal in Fund 1 that was a stamping and fab roll up in the Chicago area. And it was, really a business where we mashed together 4 microcap companies. They were all below 50 million in revenue. One of them was 45, 2 were in the mid 20s, and 1 was below 10. So we tried to smash that together, create a $100 million revenue platform that had 7 million of EBITDA. And then the goal was to double EBITDA to, 15, a little over double it. And then, hopefully sell off. It didn't go really well for a variety of reasons. We ran into some challenges with the customer base, and then ran into some challenges with the operational improvement plans. And then ultimately COVID came along, and it really was the tidal wave crashing over the bow of the boat that sunk it. But what we learned there that we've now applied to Fund 2 was size matters. So we will no longer buy platform businesses below $50 million in revenue. We'll do bolt-ons that are smaller, for sure. But, platform businesses especially where a transformation is needed, an improvement is needed, just a bright line no-go for us. And the reason why is we, demonstrated out that, small things kill small companies because they tend to have more operational and financial risk because they don't tend to have the scale in terms of systems, processes, and people to mitigate risks when they do come along. And so with these smaller businesses, little things can cause you to be staring into the abyss of insolvency pretty quickly because they don't have enough of those systems, processes, people, and therefore structure to sometimes take the actions or the medicine needed to fix the business when it's that size. So for us, we don't do platforms anymore that are below a certain size, which is that $50 million bright line, micro cap deals. It's not worth the risk. And, the thing we're trying to continually improve is getting better risk-weighted returns, at the end of the day. So that's a way to mitigate, that we can very much control, right? It's a good way to, not take as much risk in a fund is by, portfolio construction. Kind of motherhood and apple pie, kind of obvious thing, but, we had some really good deals that were below, that were smaller. And, we kind of figured out it's not worth the risk. So we don't do it anymore.
Got it. Okay. So size matters. Okay. I love that. And, it's interesting. I was having that with one of my portfolio companies right now is they want to do some acquisitions. And we started talking about that exact same thing. They said, but they're trading at 16x. And I said, yeah, it's a little expensive, but here's why you're paying a premium when it's bigger. It was around 50 or 60 million is because they now have systems, they have processes. They're not just a bunch of cobbled together staff and people just trying to make it up. And so they've solved a lot of problems. That's why they got to that revenue point. So yes, you pay a premium or you don't. You want to dive in on the smaller ones? That's pretty risky. Sure, you get a deal, but sometimes what looks like a deal is really you catching a falling knife. And we don't want to do that to say, look at the deal, look at the price on this thing. And you're like, yeah, go ahead and grab it. See what happens. You slice your hand off. And so sometimes a deal is not always a deal. We want to look at to say, and you said it great, where it was just saying too much downside and not enough upside to justify it. That couldn't have said it better, my man. So that is absolutely critical. Now, if there are operators out there right now who just want to get a serious look from a company like yours at Speyside, what are 2 or 3 things that an operator needs to demonstrate to an allocator like you? Not just claim, but demonstrate to get that serious look from a firm like you guys.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question. And I think about it how do you go from not just necessarily a GP or, whatever, but how do you go from operator to investor? Because, private equity fund is just one, think of it as a vessel, right? It's one way to do investing. It's the way that, I currently do it. But I also went from operator to investor, going from running a manufacturing plant in Mexico to doing corporate M&A. And so there's kind of different ways to do it. And there are different vessels to do it in, right? It just kind of depends on, what you're trying to achieve. But if you think about the investing process, right? There's in private equity funds anyway, but most any vessel, that we're talking about, you got to raise money, you got to find deals, you got to execute deals, then you got to transform deals, i.e. create value, and then you got to exit deals, right? Those are kind of the big things. And, with people that are going from operator to investor, usually the place where they are less experienced and, it's a little bit harder to learn quickly is the deal execution standpoint. How do you buy a company? Now, the good news is, there's kind of 2 big parts of that. There's the valuation, and then there's the deal docs where you need to get better. So kind of finance and legal, if you will, but there's accounting and tax and all kinds of things wrapped up into that statement. So for folks that want to, kind of be in that game, you gotta be able to help create value at a fund in one of several ways. Either be able to help raise money, be able to find deals, be able to help execute deals. Normally, most people get into the transformation side of the game, as an operating partner, and then maybe as an investor, and then being able to exit. So for us, We think about a lot about that, like especially in the transformational, part of the game. Like you can learn a lot, and in a fund like ours, those sorts of folks are really, really valuable. And we look at that because the reality of what we do, at least at Speyside, most of the value is created after the deal closes, because that's where we're executing that PortCo Value Creation System to improve the EBITDA and therefore the equity value of the business. So if you're a guy or gal that hasn't done a lot of deals, a lot of times the transition into a fund is usually the transformational route, and then you can kind of learn the other parts. The harder part is to learn right away, if you haven't gone through corporate M&A or investment banking or something like that, is the execution part. But there are a lot of like tools out there to learn that and whatnot. Like, when I went into corporate M&A, they sent me to like a couple month like training class on deal execution, basically. And, Wall Street Prep or one of those things, like you can take their courses, and if you're smart, they break it down, those kinds of courses. They break it down really well, how deal execution happens. And then it's a bit like an apprenticeship. You just got to go do it. Like, unfortunately, you can't, it's not like the movie The Matrix where they can just, shove a jack in the back of your head and upload all the knowledge. You have to go learn it by winning or learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, there's been times where I was like, for that one part, I wish that was a real thing where you could download and learn Kung Fu, just like Morpheus and what is his name? Neo. Yeah. So I love it. But until then, we'll put in the reps and some good deals, and we'll just keep winning and learning. So this has been great getting to know you and learning all about Speyside, your fund, and all of the cool things that you're doing. And just, I can see why you were oversubscribed on your last fund. Now, before we wrap things up, is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know, ways to reach out to you, ways if they just want to get more of Eric in their life?
Yeah, sure. If you go on our website, you can find my contact information, or go on my LinkedIn. Always happy to take calls or answer emails. And, we're always looking for good businesses to buy. We really love buying $50 million to $500 million revenue manufacturing and value-added distribution businesses. So, if folks are looking to sell something at some point, or just want help or, ideas on how to do that, happy to talk to them. And, we're always looking for good operating partners, management team members, and boutique consulting firms to work with as well. So happy to talk with those folks also. Yeah, I think I personally think I have the greatest job ever. I joke around with some of my industry cohorts and tell them like I would actually do my job for free. Which is probably not completely true. There are definitely parts of my job I would do for free, probably parts that I would pay somebody to be able to do. I really love like finding cool companies to buy and figuring out ways to improve them. That's the part of my job that I love it to death. So always happy to talk about that with folks, and look forward to making more connections in the future. If there are people that want to sell businesses or are looking to work in a private equity portco at some point.
So this has been absolutely good talking to you and learning about your fund and all the excellence that you guys do at Speyside. And I could see why you were oversubscribed on your 300 million. So just to summarize everything that Eric and I spoke about, you want to align and incentivize your PortCo management teams just to hit the targets you need for your fund. The second one is build your best-in-class processes to overlay into private equity portfolio companies that you acquire. And finally, clear and constant communication creates results, and prior proper planning prevents piss-poor performance. You do these things and you too will be well on your way in your pursuit of making billions.